And the criticism was very natural, though they could not deny that, when the hour for Sunday service came, Mr. F. commanded the respect and attention of all. That hour never came, however, on our first Sunday in Jacksonville. We were too busy and the men too scattered, so the chaplain made his accustomed foray beyond the lines instead. "Is it not Sunday?" slyly asked the unregenerate lieutenant. "Nay," quoth his reverence, waxing fervid, "it is the day of judgment." This reminds me of a raid up the river, conducted by one of our senior captains, an enthusiast whose grey beard and prophetic manner always took me back to the Fifth Monarchy men. He was most successful that day, bringing back horses, cattle, provisions, and prisoners, and one of the latter complained bitterly of being held, stating that Captain R. had promised his speedy liberty. But that doughty official spurned the imputation of such weak blandishments in his day of triumphant retribution. "Promise him," said he. "I promised him nothing but the day of judgment and periods of damnation." Often since I have rolled beneath my tongue this savoury and solemn sentence, and I do not believe that since the days of the Long Parliament there has been a more resounding anathema. In Colonel Montgomery's hands these up-river raids reached the dignity of a fine art. His conceptions of foraging were rather more Western and liberal than mine, and on these excursions he fully indemnified himself for any undue abstinence demanded of him when in camp. I remember being on the wharf with some naval officers when he came down from his first trip. The steamer seemed an animated hen-coop. Live poultry hung from the foremast shrouds, dead ones from the mainmast, geese hissed from the binnacle, a pig raced the quarter-deck, and a duck's wings were seen fluttering from a line which was wont to sustain duck trousers. The naval heroes, mindful of their own short rations, and taking high views of one's duties in a conquered country, looked at me reproachfully, as who should say, "Shall these things be?" In a moment or two the returning foragers had landed. "Captain ," said Montgomery courteously, "would you allow me to send a remarkably fine turkey for your use on board?" "Lieutenant ," said Major Corwin, "may I ask your acceptance of a pair of ducks for your mess?" Never did I behold more cordial relations between army and navy than sprang into existence at these sentences. So true it is, as Charles Lamb says, that a single present of game may diffuse kindly sentiments through a whole community. These little trips were called rest. There was no other rest during those 10 days. An immense amount of picket and fatigue duty had to be done. 2 redoubts were to be built, to command the northern valley. All the intervening grove, which now afforded lurking ground for a daring enemy, must be cleared away, and a few houses must be reluctantly razed for the same purpose. The fort on the left was named Fort Higginson, and that built by my own regiment in return, Fort Montgomery. The former was necessarily a hasty work, and is now, I believe, in ruins. The latter was far more elaborately constructed, on lines well traced by the 4th New Hampshire during the previous occupation. It did great credit to Captain Trowbridge of my regiment, formerly of the New York Volunteer Engineers, who had charge of its construction. How like a dream seems now that period of daily skirmishes and nightly watchfulness! The fatigue was so constant that the days hurried by. I felt the need of some occasional change of ideas, and having just received from the North Mr. Brooke's beautiful translation of John Paul's Titan, I used to retire to my bedroom for some 10 minutes every afternoon and read a chapter or two. It was more refreshing than a nap, and will always be to me one of the most fascinating books in the world, with this added association. After all, what concerned me was not so much the fear of an attempt to drive us out and retake the city, for that would be against the whole policy of the rebels in that region, as of an effort to fulfil their threats and burn it by some nocturnal dash. The most valuable buildings belonged to Union men, and the upper part of the town, built chiefly of resinous pine, was combustible to the last degree. In case of fire, if the wind blew towards the river, we might lose steamers and all. I remember regulating my degree of disrobing by the direction of the wind. If it blew from the river, it was safe to make oneself quite comfortable. If otherwise, it was best to conform to Sawara's idea of luxury, and take off one spur. So passed our busy life for 10 days. There were no tidings of reinforcements, and I hardly knew whether I wished for them, or rather, I desired them as a choice of evils, for our men were giving out from overwork, and the recruiting excursions for which we had mainly come were hardly possible. At the utmost I had asked for the addition of 4 companies and a light battery, Judge of my surprise when 2 infantry regiments successively arrived. I must resort to a scrap from the diary. Perhaps diaries are apt to be thought tedious, but I would rather read a page of one, whatever the events described, than any more deliberate narrative. It gives glimpses so much more real and vivid. Headquarters, Jacksonville, March 20th, 1863, midnight. For the last 24 hours we have been sending women and children out of town, in answer to a demand by flag of truce, with a threat of bombardment. Notebook. I advised them not to go, and the majority declined doing so. It was designed, no doubt, to intimidate, and in our ignorance of the force actually outside, we have had to recognize the possibility of danger and work hard at our defenses. At any time, by going into the outskirts, we can have a skirmish, which is nothing but fun, but when night closes in over a small, weary garrison, there sometimes steals into the mind, like a chill, that most sickening of all sensations, the anxiety of a commander. This was the night generally set for an attack, if any, though I'm pretty well satisfied that they have not strength to dare it, and the worst they could probably do is to burn the town. But tonight, instead of enemies, appear friends, our devoted civic ally, Judge S., and a whole Connecticut regiment, the 6th, under Major Meeker, and though the latter are aground 12 miles below, yet they enable one to breathe more freely. I only wish they were black. But now I have to show not only that blacks can fight, but that they and white soldiers can act in harmony together. That evening the enemy came up for a reconnaissance, in the deepest darkness, and there were alarms all night. The next day the 6th Connecticut got afloat and came up river, and 2 days after, to my continued amazement, arrived a part of the 8th Maine under Lieutenant Colonel Twitchell. This increased my command to 4 regiments, or parts of regiments, half white, half black. Skirmishing had almost ceased, our defences being tolerably complete, and looking from without much more effective than they really were. We were safe from any attack by a small force, and hoped that the enemy could not spare a large one from Charleston or Savannah. All looked bright without, and gave leisure for some small anxieties within. It was the first time in the war, so far as I know, that white and black soldiers had served together on regular duty. Jealousy was still felt towards even the officers of colored regiments, and any difficult contingency would be apt to bring it out. The white soldiers, just from shipboard, felt a natural desire to stray about the town, and no attack from an enemy would be so disastrous as the slightest collision between them and the black provost guard. I shudder, even now, to think of the train of consequences bearing on the whole course of the subsequent national events, which one such mishap might have produced. It is almost impossible for us now to remember in what a delicate balance then hung the whole question of negro enlistments, and consequently of slavery. Fortunately for my own serenity, I had great faith in the intrinsic power of military discipline, and also knew that a common service would soon produce a mutual respect among the good soldiers, and so it proved. But the first 12 hours of this mixed command were to me a more anxious period than any outward alarms had created. Let us resort to the notebook again. Jacksonville, March 22nd, 1863. It is Sunday. The bell is ringing for church, and Reverend Mr. F. from Beaufort is to preach. This afternoon our good quartermaster establishes a Sunday school for our little colony of contrabands, now numbering 70. Sunday afternoon. The bewildering report is confirmed, and in addition to the 6th Connecticut, which came yesterday, appears part of the 8th Maine. The remainder, with its colonel, will be here tomorrow, and, report says, Major General Hunter. Now my hope is that we may go to some point higher up the river, which we can hold for ourselves. There are 2 other points, Magnolia and Palatka, which in themselves are as favorable as this, and for getting recruits better. So I shall hope to be allowed to go, to take posts, and then let white troops garrison them. That is my programme. What makes the thing more puzzling is that the 8th Maine has only brought 10 days' rations, so that they evidently are not here to stay, and yet where they go, or why they come, is a puzzle. Meanwhile we can sleep sound o' nights, and if the black and white babies do not quarrel and pull hair, we shall do very well. Colonel Rust, on arriving, said frankly that he knew nothing of the plans prevailing in the department, but that General Hunter was certainly coming soon